The heavy oak doors of the pack house made no sound as the Alpha King slipped inside, 3 weeks early. He expected a warm welcome. Instead, he found a trembling Omega Maid in the shadowed hallway. Her hands were stained with fresh blood, and her whispered warning chilled his very soul. Stay silent. The rain over the northern Crescent territory was relentless, a freezing downpour that washed away the scent of pine and earth. For Alpha King Silas Blackwood, the storm was a welcome cloak. He had spent the last 2 months in the brutal, unforgiving terrain of the Howling Peaks, quelling a border rebellion that had threatened to tear his kingdom apart. He was exhausted, his bones aching with the deep, primal fatigue that only an alpha who had spent too much time in his wolf form could understand. But tonight, anticipation thrummed in his veins, keeping the weariness at bay. He had ridden ahead of his royal guard, leaving his second-in-command, Arthur, to bring the remaining troops home. Silas wanted nothing more than to surprise his Luna, Genevieve. Their mating had been a political alliance 5 years ago, a merging of the Blackwood and Sterling packs. But Silas had grown to love her deeply. He craved the soft scent of lavender and vanilla that always clung to her skin, the warmth of their grand bed, and the illusion of peace she provided. Bypassing the main gates through a secure, ancient tunnel known only to the royal bloodline, Silas entered the sprawling estate unannounced. He expected the pack house to be humming with its usual low-level nocturnal activity, guards changing shifts, night staff preparing for the morning, the distant murmur of the wolves who lived within the walls. Instead, a heavy, suffocating silence hung over the grand foyer. Silas paused, his boots dripping water onto the pristine marble floor. His wolf, Fenrir, a massive, midnight black beast residing in his mind, stirred with sudden unease. "Wrong," the wolf growled internally. "Scent is wrong." Silas flared his nostrils, drawing in the air. The familiar scents of his home were there. Lemon polish, ancient wood, the lingering aroma of roasted meats from the kitchens. But beneath it all, weaving through the air like a venomous serpent, was the sharp, metallic tang of fresh blood. Every muscle in his massive frame tensed. He didn't call out. He didn't shift. He simply melted into the shadows of the corridor, his predatory instincts taking over. He moved with a terrifying silence toward the royal wing, his mind racing through terrible scenarios. Had the rebels bypassed his army? Was the pack house under siege? As he reached the top of the grand staircase, the shadows near his private chambers shifted. Silas's eyes, glowing faintly with an ethereal gold light in the dimness, locked onto a small, frail figure backing out of the Luna's private sitting room. It was Maeve. Silas recognized her only because of his eidetic memory for his pack members. Maeve was an Omega, a low-ranking maid whose family had lost their standing decades ago. She was usually invisible, a ghost who dusted the baseboards and kept her eyes glued to the floor. But right now, Maeve was not invisible. She was shaking so violently that the wicker laundry basket in her hands was rattling. As she turned toward the stairs, the moonlight filtering through the skylight illuminated her. Silas's breath hitched. The front of her simple grey cotton uniform was soaked in a horrifying amount of crimson. The white towels piled high in her basket were saturated with it, dripping heavy, dark drops onto the plush carpets. Silas stepped out of the shadows, his towering, muscular frame completely blocking her path. He opened his mouth to demand answers, his alpha aura flaring, a heavy, dominant pressure meant to bring any lesser wolf to their knees. Maeve gasped, her amber eyes widening in sheer, unadulterated terror as she looked up and saw her king. But instead of submitting, instead of dropping to the floor and exposing her neck, the Omega did the unthinkable. She dropped the basket. The heavy, blood-soaked towels hit the floor with a sickening thud. Before Silas could react, Maeve lunged forward. Her small, blood-stained hands clamped desperately over the lower half of his face, her fingers digging into his jaw. Fenrir roared in Silas's mind at the blatant disrespect, demanding the Omega be thrown across the hall. But Silas froze. It wasn't the audacity of her action that stopped him. It was the look in her eyes. It was a look of profound, absolute despair. "Stay silent, my king," Maeve breathed, her voice barely a vibration in the quiet air, a tear cutting a clean line down her dirt-smudged cheek. "Please, for your life, make no sound." Silas stared down at her, the scent of the blood hitting him at close range. It wasn't Genevieve's blood. He would know his mate's scent anywhere. It was the scent of an older male, laced with the bitter tang of fear and adrenaline. Gently, but with unquestionable strength, Silas gripped Maeve's wrists and pulled her hands away from his face. He didn't speak, but his glowing golden eyes demanded an explanation. Maeve didn't hesitate. She grabbed his thick, leather-clad forearm with surprising strength and yanked him toward the intricate wooden tapestries lining the hallway. She reached behind a carving of a howling wolf, pressing a hidden lever. The wall clicked softly, swinging inward to reveal a narrow, pitch-black passageway. The old servants' corridors, built centuries ago and supposedly sealed off. She shoved him inside and pulled the hidden door shut, just as the heavy oak door to the Luna's sitting room creaked open down the hall. The servants' passage was suffocatingly tight. Silas's broad shoulders brushed against the cold stone walls on both sides. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light, piercing through tiny, disguised grates that looked out into the main hallways and rooms. Maeve stood pressed against his chest, trembling like a leaf in a hurricane, her bloody uniform staining his leather armor. Silas leaned down, his lips barely a fraction of an inch from her ear. "Whose blood is that, Maeve?" he whispered, his voice a lethal, vibrating baritone that promised violence. Maeve swallowed hard, her chest heaving as she struggled to keep her own voice down. "Commander Harrison, Alpha. He found out." Silas's heart stopped. Commander Harrison was the head of the Royal Guard, a grizzled veteran who had trained Silas since he was a pup. He was family. "Found out what?" Silas demanded, his hands curling into massive fists. "Is the pack under attack? Where is my Luna?" Maeve squeezed her eyes shut, a sob catching in her throat. "The pack is not under attack from the outside, my king. The rot is inside, and the Luna is the one holding the knife." Fenrir snarled violently, thrashing against the confines of Silas's mind. "Liar! Rip out her throat!" The beast loved Genevieve. Silas loved Genevieve. This Omega was speaking treason. He grabbed Maeve by the shoulders, his grip bruising. "Choose your next words with absolute care, Omega." "Look for yourself," Maeve whispered, pointing a trembling finger toward a brass grate at eye level. Silas released her and stepped forward, pressing his eye to the small opening. It provided a clear, unobstructed view into his own private royal suite. The grand fireplace was roaring, casting flickering orange light across the opulent room. There, standing by the mahogany liquor cabinet, was Genevieve. She was breathtakingly beautiful, her long blonde hair cascading down the back of a sheer silk robe. But she wasn't crying. She wasn't fearful. She was laughing. It was a cold, sharp sound that sent a shard of ice directly into Silas's chest, and she wasn't alone. Standing behind her, his arms wrapped possessively around her waist, his face buried in the crook of her neck, was Damien. Damien, the beta of the Northern Crescent. Damien, who had fought back-to-back with Silas in a dozen wars. Damien, the man Silas called brother. "You're sure the old man didn't send a mind link to anyone before you cut his throat?" Genevieve asked, turning in Damien's arms to trail her manicured fingers down the beta's chest. "Positive," Damien replied, his voice lazy and arrogant. "Harrison was old, slow. He walked into your chambers to report the discrepancy in the armory logs, and I took him from behind. silver blade straight through the vocal cords. He couldn't have whimpered, let alone linked the pack. Silas's gaze drifted downward. Pushed unceremoniously behind one of the velvet armchairs was a large Persian rug. It was rolled up haphazardly, and a pool of dark, thick blood was spreading from beneath it, staining the white marble floor. Harrison. A wave of dizziness washed over Silas. The betrayal was so sudden, so absolute, that his knees actually threatened to buckle. He had hurried home, riding through a freezing storm, desperate to hold the woman who was currently orchestrating his downfall with his best friend. And the maid? Damien asked, pouring them both a glass of amber liquid. The little rat who came in to turn down the bed? Maeve, Genevieve sneered, taking the glass. She's an Omega coward. She knows her place. I told her if she didn't clean up the mess and dispose of the linens without a word, I would have her brother Thomas flayed alive in the town square. She won't speak. Behind Silas, Maeve let out a silent, shuddering breath. Silas remembered now. 3 years ago, he had caught a drunken guard beating a young Omega boy named Thomas for dropping a tray. Silas had broken the guard's arm and banished him. He hadn't realized the boy was Maeve's brother. She wasn't just hiding. She was protecting her family and paying a debt to her king. Good, Damien said, stepping away to look at a map spread across Silas's own desk. Everything is set. Silas won't be back for another 3 weeks. By tomorrow night, the wolfsbane we've been slipping into the Western Aqueduct will take full effect. His loyalists in the outer districts will be too sick to shift, let alone fight. Silas felt the blood drain from his face. The Western Aqueduct supplied water to the poorest sectors of the pack, the elderly, the pups, the lower-ranking wolves who worshipped the ground Silas walked on. Wolfsbane poisoning wasn't just debilitating. In high enough doses over time, it was fatal. And the council? Genevieve asked, a dark, ambitious fire in her eyes. Bought and paid for, Damien smirked. When we announce that Silas fell in battle in the Howling Peaks, I will step up as Alpha, as is my right as Beta. And you, my beautiful Luna, will stand by my side, the grieving widow. Genevieve smiled, a wicked, triumphant expression that made her look like a stranger to Silas. She placed a hand over her flat stomach. A grieving widow who is carrying the Alpha's tragic, posthumous heir. The council will eat it up. They will crown you regent until Silas's child comes of age. And by then, the Northern Crescent will be entirely ours. The silence in the tight passageway was deafening. The sheer magnitude of the treason was paralyzing. They weren't just stealing his throne or his life, they were stealing his legacy. Genevieve was pregnant, not with his pup, but with Damien's. Silas stepped back from the grate. The exhaustion that had plagued him moments ago vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating, terrifying rage. The Alpha King was dead, replaced by something much darker, much more dangerous. He looked down at Maeve. The terrified Omega was staring up at him, awaiting his command, her life entirely in his hands. They intend to slaughter thousands of innocents tomorrow night, Silas whispered, his voice stripped of all emotion. They think they have won. He reached out, his massive, calloused hand gently resting on Maeve's trembling shoulder. You saved my life tonight, Maeve Sterling. And in return, I am going to paint these walls with their blood. The stone walls of the hidden catacombs felt like a tomb, but for Alpha King Silas Blackwood, they were a war room. He guided Maeve through the pitch-black labyrinth, using only his enhanced night vision and the phantom memory of maps he had studied as a pup. His mind was a tempest of rage and calculation. The mate bond, a metaphysical tether he had believed was sacred, now felt like a rotting chain around his chest. He could feel Genevieve's faint, satisfied pulse through the bond, a sickening reminder of her deception. Where do these tunnels lead, Alpha? Maeve whispered, her voice still trembling, though she kept pace with him admirably. Her small hand gripped the back of his leather armor so she wouldn't trip in the dark. "Everywhere," Silas replied grimly. "They were built during the First Lycan War. My ancestors knew that a fortress is only as strong as its secrets." They reached a heavy iron grate that smelled of sulfur and old dust. Silas pushed it open with a sharp grunt, stepping into a forgotten subterranean storeroom directly beneath the pack's sprawling kitchens. He turned to Maeve. Even in the dim light filtering through the floorboards above, she looked fragile, her grey uniform still heavy with Commander Harrison's blood. Yet there was an undeniable core of steel in her amber eyes. "Maeve, I need you to do something incredibly dangerous," Silas said, dropping to one knee so he was at eye level with the Omega. "You must go back upstairs, change your uniform, burn the bloody one in the incinerator, and return to your quarters as if nothing happened. Can you do that?" Maeve swallowed hard. "If the Luna sees me—" "She won't look at you twice," Silas assured her, his voice softening just a fraction. "To her you are invisible. That is our greatest advantage. But before you go to your quarters, I need you to find your brother, Thomas. Tell him to take a horse from the eastern stables and ride toward the Howling Peaks. He must intercept my second-in-command, Arthur, and tell him to abandon the main army and ride back with only the elite vanguard. Tell Thomas the code word is Blood Moon." Maeve nodded, her jaw setting with sudden determination. "I will do it, my king. I won't fail you." "I know you won't," Silas murmured, surprised by the sudden, fierce protectiveness blooming in his chest for this lowly maid. "Go, and Maeve, thank you." As she slipped away into the shadows, Silas moved deeper into the underbelly of the pack house. He had 3 hours before dawn, 3 hours to stop a massacre. He navigated to the underground cells, where the pack's master of whispers, a scarred, lethal wolf named Gideon, operated. Gideon was alone, sharpening a silver blade by lamplight when Silas materialized from the secret doorway. The spymaster leaped to his feet, a dagger instantly in his hand, before his eyes widened. "Alpha, we thought you were weeks away. The kingdom is compromised, Gideon," Silas rumbled, stepping fully into the light. "Damien and Genevieve have committed treason. Harrison is dead, and by tomorrow night, they plan to poison the Western Aqueduct with wolfsbane to cripple the outer districts." Gideon didn't gasp. He didn't question the king. His eyes simply darkened with lethal intent. "Give the order, sire." "We cannot take them in the pack house. Damien commands the Royal Guard now. A civil war in the halls would cost too many innocent lives," Silas stated, unfolding a map onto Gideon's desk. "We take the aqueduct first. Gather the shadows. Only the ones you personally brought into this world. No one who answers to the beta. We move out in 10 minutes. The rain was still hammering the Northern Crescent territory when Silas and his elite strike team of 6 shadow operatives reached the Western Reservoir. The aqueduct was a massive stone structure that filtered fresh mountain water down into the valley where the lower-ranking families, the elderly, and the pups resided. Through the pouring rain, Silas's glowing golden eyes spotted them. 12 mercenaries wearing unmarked black gear, unloading heavy iron vats from the back of a covered wagon. The pungent, earthy stench of concentrated wolfsbane cut through the smell of the storm, making Silas's nose burn. It was enough poison to kill half his pack. Silas didn't bother shifting into his wolf form. He wanted them to see their king's face before they died. "Leave one alive for the council," Silas commanded quietly over the comms link. "Slaughter the rest." Like phantoms unleashed from hell, Silas and his shadows descended. Silas dropped from a stone archway directly onto the mercenary captain. The sheer force of the Alpha's landing crushed the man's chest. Before the others could even draw their silver-laced weapons, the shadows were upon them. It was a masterclass in lethal precision. Silas moved through the rain like a reaper. A mercenary lunged at him with a spear. Silas sidestepped, caught the wooden shaft, snapped it in two, and drove the splintered end into the man's throat. Blood washed away in the freezing downpour. Within 90 seconds, 11 men lay dead in the mud. The 12th, a trembling rogue wolf hired for the job, was pinned against the wagon wheel by Gideon's boot. Silas walked over slowly, the rain washing the blood from his face. He looked at the heavy vats of wolfsbane, his heart pounding with the terrifying realization of how close his people had come to a gruesome death. He crouched down, meeting the terrified rogue's eyes. "You are going to testify before the elite council tomorrow evening," Silas growled, his voice carrying the full, crushing weight of his alpha aura. "You will tell them exactly who hired you to poison my people. If you do, I will grant you a quick death. If you lie, I will let my wolf, Fenrir, eat you alive piece by piece. Do we have an understanding?" The rogue nodded frantically, sobbing into the mud. Silas stood up, looking back toward the distant, glowing lights of his pack house. The storm was passing, but the true devastation was just beginning. The great hall of the Northern Crescent pack house was a masterpiece of ancient architecture, its vaulted ceilings supported by massive pillars of carved obsidian. The next evening, the hall was packed. Every member of the elite council, the noble families, and the ranking officers of the guard had been summoned for an emergency assembly. Silas watched from the high gallery, hidden behind heavy velvet curtains, completely masked from scent by herbs Gideon had provided. Down below, Damien stood at the grand podium, dressed in mourning black. Beside him, Genevieve sat in a high-backed chair, a delicate black veil covering her face as she dabbed at her dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. "My brothers and sisters," Damien began, his voice echoing with perfectly feigned grief, "I bring you news that breaks my heart. A messenger bird arrived this morning from the Howling Peaks. Our glorious Alpha King, Silas Blackwood, has fallen in battle." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Council members murmured in shock. Some of the older warriors bowed their heads in immediate sorrow. "The rebels ambushed his vanguard," Damien continued smoothly. "Silas fought bravely, taking 100 men down with him, but the numbers were too great. To compound this tragedy, our beloved Commander Harrison suffered a fatal heart attack last night in his chambers, overwhelmed by the stress of the war." Genevieve let out a dramatic, shuddering sob, and Damien placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "As your beta, by ancient law, the mantle of leadership falls to me. I vow to guide the Northern Crescent through this dark time, and to protect our grieving Luna, who carries the late king's heir." The council members began to nod, muttering their reluctant assent. The transition of power was happening flawlessly. "A beautiful speech, Damien," a voice thundered from the upper balcony. It wasn't loud, but the deep, vibrating alpha frequency behind it rattled the obsidian pillars and silenced the hall instantly. Every head snapped upward. Silas stepped out from behind the velvet curtains. He wasn't wearing royal finery. He wore his battle-worn leather armor, still caked with the dried mud of the aqueduct. He vaulted over the balcony railing, dropping 20 feet to land effortlessly on the stone floor with an earth-shaking thud. The color instantly drained from Genevieve's face. She stood up so fast her chair toppled over. Damien froze, his eyes widening in pure, unadulterated panic. "Silas?" Damien choked out. "How? You were in the peaks." "I came home early," Silas said, walking slowly down the center aisle. The crowd parted for him, dropping to their knees in awe and reverence as their supposedly dead king marched forward. Imagine my surprise to find my Luna and my Beta orchestrating the murder of my commander, planning the slaughter of my outer districts, and stealing my throne. "He's lying!" Genevieve shrieked, her composed facade shattering. "He's an imposter! A skinwalker! Guards, kill him!" A few of the royal guards, the ones loyal to Damien, drew their swords, but before they could take a step, the heavy oak doors of the great hall blasted open. Arthur, Silas's second-in-command, marched in alongside Gideon and Thomas, followed by 50 heavily armed vanguard elites. They dragged the surviving rogue poisoner and the empty vats of wolfsbane with them, dumping them onto the floor. "The vanguard stands with the true king," Arthur bellowed, and the rebel guards instantly dropped their weapons, recognizing they were vastly outmatched. Damien snarled, realizing his coup was dismantled. His bones cracked violently as he forced a shift right there in the hall, tearing out of his clothes to become a massive, russet-furred werewolf. He lunged at Silas, desperate to end it in a physical challenge for the Alpha title. Silas didn't flinch. He allowed Fenrir to take control. In a blur of monstrous speed, Silas shifted into a beast that was a full head taller than Damien. A midnight black wolf of mythic proportions. The two titans clashed in the center of the room. The fight was brutally short. Damien was a warrior, but Silas was a king forged in 50 wars. Silas's jaws clamped around Damien's neck, pinning the russet wolf to the marble floor. He didn't rip the throat out. Instead, he applied agonizing pressure until Damien whined, shifting back into his human form, beaten and utterly humiliated. Silas shifted back, standing naked and terrifyingly dominant over his former friend. Arthur handed him a cloak, which Silas fastened around his shoulders. "Damien of the Northern Crescent," Silas's voice boomed. "I strip you of your wolf, your rank, and your name. You will be banished to the Dead Lands, to wander as a human until the elements take you." He turned his blazing golden eyes toward Genevieve. She was cowering against the wall, weeping. Real tears this time. "Silas, please. He forced me. The baby is his," Silas interrupted coldly. He reached out with his mind, grabbing hold of the fragile, fraying mate bond that connected their souls. With a roar of pure, dominant willpower, Silas forcefully snapped it. Genevieve screamed in agony, collapsing to the floor as the spiritual severing ripped through her nervous system. It was the ultimate disgrace. "You are stripped of your lunar title. You will join your lover in the Dead Lands." The hall was dead silent, save for Genevieve's whimpers. The king had dispensed absolute justice. Silas looked out over the stunned crowd. "My kingdom was saved tonight, not by my armies, and not by my counsel." His eyes scanned the room until he found her. Standing near the back, looking terrified but incredibly brave, was Maeve. "Maeve Sterling, step forward," Silas commanded. The crowd parted again, murmuring in confusion as the low-ranking Omega Maid walked slowly down the aisle. She kept her eyes on the floor out of habit. But when she reached the front, Silas gently placed a finger under her chin, lifting her gaze to meet his. "This Omega," Silas announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall, faced down a king in the dark to save his life. She risked her family to stop a massacre. She possesses more honor and courage than the elites who sat on this stage. Silas took her small, scarred hands in his massive ones. "You are an Omega no longer, Maeve. I name you Lady Sterling, head of the royal household, and a permanent seat on my council." Maeve gasped, tears spilling over her lashes. "My king, I am not worthy." "You are exactly what this pack needs," Silas murmured softly. Just for her, a spark of something entirely new and profoundly deep igniting in his chest. "You told me to stay silent, Maeve. Now, it is your turn to have a voice. The Northern Crescent healed, its foundation no longer built on the fragile lies of political alliances, but on the unbreakable courage found in the darkest shadows." King Silas never forgot the Omega who ordered him to stay silent. In Maeve, he found not just a savior, but a true equal. The storm had washed away the rot, leaving a fiercely loyal kingdom and a love forged in blood.